Welcome, folks. My name is Frederick Douglass Knolls. This is the presentation on the social political power of hip-hop. This is the purpose of the seminar. It's the abstract that was also part of the conference. The seminar examines the poetry and musical works of the late Tupac Shakur in order to delineate the role of social responsibility in hip-hop culture. The seminar will explore the historical significance of hip-hop culture and the social injustices affecting urban youth in the late 20th century. In the midst of social activism for the liberation of urban youth, Shakur's thug life philosophy and his identity struggle as the progeny of a Black Panther political party member, in addition to being a young black male in 20th century America, Shakur's turbulent dichotomous lifestyle drove him to a prophetic demise, immersed in a narrative of pseudo-depicted tales of poverty and violence. The presentation will analyze the life and works of American icon Tupac Shakur in order to raise awareness surrounding social injustice. It will engage participants in discussion on the role and value of amity in corners of seeming isolation from mainstream activism. So in a nutshell, and I really want this to be like an interactive discussion and conversation and not a one-sided lecture and so forth, but we're going to examine the social political power of hip-hop, the historical significance of hip-hop, and in particular taking a look at Tupac Shakur's role in hip-hop society. I need you to work with me. Slide 3. So the goals, we will examine social responsibility in hip-hop culture, discuss how social responsibility in hip-hop can be used as a tool in ethno-political centric situations, and list what actions should be taken to enact social responsibility. So first and foremost, we need a definition of what social responsibility is, right? Has anybody ever heard the phrase social responsibility over and over, right? Anyone who's not familiar with the term? Okay, audience-wise, so I can just move on from there. That works. So, of course, thematically and so forth with the conference, the impact of law and finance on the other tradition, right? So this is a quote from Jeffrey Ogbar, associate professor at UConn and author of, actually, this book right here, Hip Hop Revolution. But one cannot explore blackness without the other that gives meaning, whiteness. Indeed, the two concepts are intimately bonded together in powerful, painful, and complicated ways, right? So for a second, what does that mean to you? Take a look at this. Let's just like critically analyze this for a couple of seconds, right? Or a minute or so. But one cannot explore blackness without the other that gives meaning, whiteness. Indeed, the two concepts are intimately bonded together in powerful, painful, and complicated ways.
Slavery.
Okay, slavery, right? All right, that's one example. Others? What does it mean? When we talk about this definition of otherness and so forth. What is this saying to you right now? Come on, don't be scared, folks. We're going to be here for a little bit.
It just reminds me of the opposite. You know, if you have whiteness, you have blackness. If you have cold, you have to have heat. In other words, like the relationship is just the same spectrum, but either ends of it.
Okay, so binaries, right? Polar opposites and so forth. Good. And tell us your names when you're talking. What's your name?
My name is John Marlowe. I live in New York.
John Marlowe from NYC. Welcome, man. And your name? Anna? Yeah. Nice to meet you, Anna. Thank you for the input. So a couple of principles as we go through this, right? So these principles come from Hip Hop Wars by Tricia Rose, and 6 principles for progressive, creative community in hip hop and beyond, right? So I'll give you a definition briefly of each one of these. So the first one, beware the manipulation of the funk, right? So that is where, where historically, and we're going to talk about historic hip hop in a second, historically, as the oral tradition, right, and the drum, right? So the African drum and the beat and so forth. So we get, in the modern sense of hip hop culture, or commercial hip hop, or commercial rap, I should say, get entangled in the beat, right? And so it's just the beat, and we're not paying attention to the content, right? And so what she's saying here is beware of that manipulation of historically oral tradition, African music. So beware when those traditions, that ancestry is being manipulated for a certain purpose, right? Remember what is amazing about chitlins, or what isn't, right? So chitlins is a soul food, right, that African slaves, when they were brought here and stripped of their culture, they were given slop, right? So they were given pig intestines. And they took that, and that's what chitlins are. And they took that and they made it into a meal because that's all they had, right? And so that's the first premise, right? That was amazing what they did with chitlins and so forth, right? But now, fast forward, modern African Americans and so forth still eat chitlins. And it's not the healthiest thing to be eating and so forth, right? We've moved beyond the institution of slavery, so we don't need to be dining on these intestinal delicacies and so forth. So that's the second premise of, what isn't amazing about chitlins. We live in a market economy. Don't let the market economy live in us, right? And I think that's self-explanatory. Represent what you want, not just what is. Your enemies might be wrong, but that doesn't make you right. And don't settle for affirmative love, all right, which is support, okay, basic needs and necessities. Demand transformational love, right? So the well-being of ourselves and the well-beings of society. So we're going to examine how hip-hop and Tupac actually fit into those. So first of all, who was Tupac, right? Born in 71. His parents are Billy Garland and Afeni Shakur. He's an American icon, actor, hip-hop artist. His name means shining serpent, thankful to God. Of course, he died at 96 at 25 years of age. A little bit more. So in 5 years of his career, so when you first saw that first video, Trap, that was his very first single off his very first album entitled To Apocalypse Now, 1991. So from 91 to 96, 6 solo albums, not including any posthumous, 11 top Billboard singles, 5 of them from his album Me Against the World, which is his 3rd album. And as the guest speaker, the keynote speaker was speaking, he was talking about me against my brother, and me against my cousin, and then me and him against the world, and this automatically popped up. So you can start to really synthesize what the keynote speaker was talking about and how this is affecting Tupac. He actually is serving time when this album is released for his sexual assault charge. 7 films, 75 million records, platinum, 2 #1 billboards, all right? So you're already in groups and so forth, right? I got 5 here. John, can you join these ladies over here? That's 4, that's 4, that's 4, and then 5, that works, all right. We don't like to go no more than 3 to 4 in the group, but I think that's gonna work right there. So I'm gonna play a little track while you guys are actually having this conversation, right? So a couple of questions, right? Historically, what was the purpose of hip hop? Okay, I want you to discuss this in your groups to the best of your ability, what you know about hip hop culture, right? What changed and why, and then what is your ideology on rap music, right? So what is your belief system, your value, what are your thoughts when it comes to rap music? Now, to specify, hip hop culture is 4 elements, right? It's breakdancing, DJing, MCing, and what am I missing? Graffiti. So those were the initial hip-hop elements in the early 70s. And I'm going to go into that in a second after we discuss this, or you discuss it, and then I'll chime in from what you may or may not be aware of, right? So rap music is 25% of hip-hop culture, the music itself, right? And even now, there are extended elements of hip-hop culture. So there's 9. So they've added street clothing, street knowledge, entrepreneurship, and I'm missing one. It will come to me in a second. But with the entrepreneurship, Dr. Dre sold beats. How much money did he sell it for? Anybody know? Almost just shy of $1 billion, like $800 million. So Dr. Dre, who was one of the original members of NWA, right, from the 80s and so forth, right, sells beats to who sells? Apple, thank you. For $800 million. So that's an example of street entrepreneurship when it comes to hip hop culture, right? So I'm gonna play this track a couple of minutes. So just in your groups, discuss these 3 questions, okay? And then I'll come around and be a little nosy too. So let me, I got a touchdown. This is my water. Let me know if you need any help or assistance, or otherwise I won't get involved in your conversations. You want to join us?
Oh, no, I'm good.
You sure? Come on, you can join us too, or nah? Ah, yes, I am actually, in the morning. Okay. Oh, I need to keep track of time. Okay, my phone, oh, there it is. So what? So what, 3:20? Okay. What is, excuse me. No problem, man. Come on in. There's just a whole lot of chairs. I like to move around a lot, as you can see, so I like to have the room to,
Obstacle course.
yeah. Okay, folks, I think that's a good way to get started. Well, give me the pause. Great question. Okay, so historically, what was the purpose of hip hop when it first came out? Does anybody have an idea, an inclination? We got my man in the back. And tell us your name, please.
My name is Shagun.
Shagun. Okay.
So I guess historically, I mean, one aspect of it was folk rebellion. Since from what I understand in African American culture is that black music has always been a folk rebellion. Started way back in slave times, and that's where our spirituals were. Going up to blues, jazz, et cetera, et cetera. So my thinking is that hip hop followed in that same tradition as folk rebellion.
Okay, yeah. Good. Rebellion from what?
From culture, from even the style of music that was happening then. It was also, at the end of the day, younger generations always have their own style and flavor, way of doing things. And so it's not like hip hop came out and was this big explosion when it first started underground and then that. So.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
Yeah.
And that's
Winton.
Winton, go ahead.
From Maine. So, kind of with that, this like sense of rebellion, I think it was both a rebellion against the current culture of the time, which was predominated by disco, and how that culture just really wasn't fitting the social conditions, and really wasn't speaking to the reality of the times. Questlove actually, he has a number of essays that he wrote about hip hop, and in some of them he mentions how hip hop came as sort of like rebellion out of this era of disco that was already dying, and people weren't feeling like there was a voice there.
Mm-hmm.
And especially like in New York, you had both crumbling infrastructure, you had people being put out, you had buildings being torn down, and the whole hip hop culture, like as you said, you had graffiti, you had breakdancing, you had MCs, and you had the music, were all ways to give voice to the people who were unheard.
Okay, well said.
And international also. I think it was an international thing because in Brazil we have a very strong hip hop culture that, as far as I remember, in the 80s.
Yeah, so the international element did take off in the early 80s and so forth, right? So initially, anybody else want to chime in for? Historically, right? So hip hop starts off like in the early 70s, like 71, 72, right? And at this point in time, you had a lot of gang activity. It started in the Bronx, New York, right? Had a lot of gang activity. In the 5 boroughs, I think there was something close to like 300 gangs, right? There's a book called Can't Stop, Won't Stop by Jeff Chang that really goes into great history about this detail. And so what happens is, I forgot the mayor's name, but they decided to build the Cross Bronx Expressway, right, the highway through the Bronx. So before then, you had diversity within the neighborhoods and so forth. You know, you had Italians and you had Latin Americans, you know, blacks living next to each other and so forth. The highway, the project, divvies that up, right? And so, of course, then you have people of color on the other side of the tracks, proverbial tracks, right? So a lot of gang activity. Two founding fathers of hip hop. First one is DJ Kool Herc. Comes from Jamaica, brings the sound, the bass heavy sound of reggae, right? Brings his huge box speakers, right? Plugs them into the playgrounds and so forth, public electricity, right? And starts spinning, okay? You have African Bambaataa, who was the leader of the gang culture of the Spades before Zulu Nation. He was a gang leader of the Spades, right? Huge gang. And so he got tired. He got tired of the violence and so forth. Now, a lot of the violence is stemming from the social political cuts that are happening in the inner city and so forth, right? So lack of employment, lack of health care, lack of education, schools closing down and so forth, right? On top of that, gentrification occurring, you had slumlords who were hiring, you know, people to actually burn their buildings to get people out, right? So at one point in time, in one night in the Bronx, there were like 33 fires going on, right? And so all this is occurring. Bambaataa says enough is enough. He forms the Zulu Nation, right, after African Zulu warriors, all right? And so this is the birth of hip hop. So now the kids have an alternative, right? Art programs are cut in the school, right? So someone looks at the turntable and says, well, if it goes clockwise, what will happen if I make it go counterclockwise? Hence, scratching is born, right? And so now, instead of these gangs coming together to fight, they start battling, B-boys. That's where the break dancing comes into play, right? So we fast forward. Now, the DJ is the hub of the culture, right? Now, the MC's job was to hype the DJ up. These were the nursery rhymes that started. You know, my DJ's the baddest, he's the coolest in the place to be, stuff like that. So the rhymes are all about the DJ. But the MC started to notice that he was getting attention, right? So now the lyrical content starts to shift a little bit. It becomes more braggadocious upon the MC himself, right? And so I just want to make sure I got my next one coming up, right? And so from there, hip-hop culture was birthed, right? And so you have the first commercial hip-hop song, Rapper's Delight, in 1979 that comes out and so forth. And this is the nursery rhyme era, right? So it was a counterculture to mainstream culture. That was the premise of hip-hop, right? In its historical inception as a counterculture, right? And so now we fast forward. What has changed in hip-hop? From that brief definition I've just given you. And we can amalgamate these two, right? So what has changed and what is your ideology on hip-hop culture, rap music? Go ahead, Whitton.
I think you kind of mentioned it a little bit. There's almost been like this industrialization of the drum beats and the break beats into this manufactured sense of the party music.
Okay.
Kind of lost that sense of speaking that might have come out of hip-hop, you know, the 80s era, while at the same time keeping the flavor that came from, you know, you had the DJs who would basically be making music for breakdancers.
Okay, so it sounds like you're touching on like the commodification of hip hop culture and the marketing and so forth. So one of the principles, right? We don't live in a market economy, right? We should be controlling the market economy, right? I'm paraphrasing and so forth. So the commodification, right? So they predicted that hip hop wouldn't last 10 years when it first came out, right? And then so now we fast forward up 40 years later, it's a multi-billion international, you know, cultural phenomenon stemming from the oral tradition, right? So the oral tradition starts in Africa for descendants of African slaves, which we are, the African diaspora, from West Africa. They bring their culture here. They are not allowed to practice their culture at all. They're stripped of their language and their practices and so forth. And so they adapt English. They sing slave songs in the fields. They put encrypted coded messages in their songs, right? So that, you know, master would not get hip to what they were saying. The slave songs turned to spirituals, right? And then the African folklore. So you ever hear remember the song, the spiritual song, I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. Right, so that stems from African folklore where, of flying Africans, right? And so Toni Morrison actually in her book, Song of Solomon, one of the characters, the main character's milkman and his great-grandfather or grandfather is a slave in the fields. He's tired, right? And he cocks his wings and he flies back home, right? And so you see the oral tradition throughout the music, from the spirituals to blues, which was the devil's music, right? So the binary opposite of the spiritual, blues to jazz, jazz to R&B / rock and roll, spoken word into hip hop and so forth, right? So the oral tradition is being carried on. What are your thoughts on rap music?
There is one thing that
Yes.
is interesting, the social conditions that didn't change.
No, not by much.
Everything else is the same. Gentrification,
Mm-hmm.
schools closed, blah, 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 unemployment. So what I think that the interesting thing that happened, at least in my country that I was telling them, is that the hip hop people and the culture, they became more political,
Mm-hmm.
and they are not only expressing the voice of people that have been left out, but they are organizing a political party.
Absolutely.
And the black people in Brazil, they are not very, committed to the parties. We have a lot of too many political parties,
Mm-hmm.
but they are slowly moving on to form their own, group, more political, have more,
And this is where Tupac comes in with his thug life philosophy. In a couple of slides, I'll get to that and so forth. Coming from his mother being and his father being Black Panthers and part of that political party, right? And so what happens with the music is the nursery rhymes, they change, right? So in 1982, Grandmaster Flash and Melly Mel, they dropped the song The Message. Don't push me because I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head, right? And so that's the first social, political hip-hop song talking about the injustices occurring within the inner city. Broken glass everywhere. People pissing on the station, they just don't care. I can't take the smell. I can't take the noise. I got no money to move out. I guess I got no choice, right? And so from there, social protests in hip-hop culture, and preferably the rap music, is born. And so we go into the 80s, we get groups like Run DMC, we get groups like Public Enemy, we get artists like KRS-One. These are all set in the backdrop for Tupac, right? So here's a myth buster, right, from Michael Eric Dyson, right? Blaming black youth for social violence reeks of the worst kind of scapegoating. Since hip-hop culture is barely a generation old and black violence is much older, the charge that hip-hop jump-started violence lacks merit, right? So just want to, we talk about hip-hop culture, we talk about the lyrics and how the content shifted. And so from the social protest era that goes all the way through the 80s, we get NWA in 1989, and they changed the entire game with Straight Outta Compton. We get this raw, introspective look into the inner cities, particularly Compton and so forth. And then the lyrical content becomes much more intense, right? It's the birth of well, not actually the birth, the transformation of the explicit label sign, right? That sign, that little label, was first intended for rock and roll music when it first came out. It was for rock. And then it became the poster child for hip-hop culture, right? And so now it's 89, no Tupac yet. Tupac is moving around a lot. He's in New York, they move a lot. He goes to Baltimore. He studies at the Baltimore School of Arts. He meets Jada Pinkett Smith there. He studies Shakespeare, he does ballet. He's in Baltimore for a brief period of time. It's hard for his mother to get stable because of her political affiliations. She was part of the Panther 21 back in the 70s, and they were charged with conspiring to bomb landmarks in New York City. She's facing over 300 years prison time. She defends herself, and she's acquitted. After she's acquitted, Tupac is born. She conceives Tupac in prison. And the only reason why she has Tupac is because she didn't think she was ever going to see the daylight again. And so she wanted a piece of her to live on. Her plan was to give birth to Tupac while she was in prison and give Tupac to her sister to raise. But she was acquitted. And she says if she knew she was going to be acquitted, she would have never had Tupac. So we came that close to missing out on him. Yes?
Did Tupac's mother outlive Tupac?
Yes, she just actually died last year. She just passed away. And I was very upset with my community college because I put in a proposal to have her come and speak. Because I saw her speak before at a university when I went to grad school. And I put it in and they denied me. It was last spring, and then she passed away. So I'm just a little, so here's Tupac's philosophy, right? And so the social political aspect that Tupac is bringing to the game. He's coming off the heels of Public Enemy, off KRS-One, and other social political artists of that particular era, the 80s and 90s. From 1987 to 1994 is considered the golden era of hip hop, right? And so his thug life philosophy, right? The hell you give little children F's everybody, right? So he says, someone must dare put the street life back on track. It's clear to anybody that can see the hustling game has gone stark, raving mad. The short and long range result will not only be detrimental to the street game, but will also destroy any foundation in our community. But more important, the combination of the self-destruction and turf warfare, coupled with government's police terrorism, fascist laws designed to capture and keep our black men and women in jail the rest of their lives and leaves a defenseless community will result in genocide, right? So, mind you, he's only about 18, 19, 20 years old with this mindset and so forth and this concept. So you have to kind of wonder, what has he witnessed, what has he saw and experienced for him to actually start to devise this type of ideology and philosophy at such a very young age. So, some social political content, right? So, the war on drugs is implemented by Nixon. Reagan takes it and puts it into full speed, right? We get things like mandatory minimum sentencing and so forth, the Drug Act of 1986, and then Clinton comes along and he takes the baton, and I'll get to that where we go from there. But so here's the premise on the war on drugs and the history of the war on drugs. Whoa, let's go back.
It's known for its heavy bass, aggressive drums, and, if you're listening hard enough, drugs.
I'm in love with the coco. I be in the kitchen cooking pies for my baby guy.
But here's what's interesting. Even though the faces of trap music are mostly young black men, drug problems cross all color lines and all class boundaries.
Now, if you picture a drug dealer in your mind, you're probably picturing some black kid standing on the street corner with his pants sagging. Plenty of drug dealing happens in the hood, but it happens everywhere else in America as well.
So why do we so strongly associate drugs with urban communities? Turns out this is not entirely by accident.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
When a wave of heroin use and drug-related crime hit big cities in the 1970s, leaders were desperate for answers, and President Nixon declared a war on drugs, initially focusing on it as a public health issue.
If we went after it as a health problem, I think in the long run we'd get both a reduction in crime and a reduction in addiction rates.
Places like Baltimore had success helping users rehab with methadone clinics, but in places like New York, they caved to public fear and pressure and opted for policies of punishment.
We have more people incarcerated today in prison just for drug crimes than all the people incarcerated in the year 1980.
But recently, a 1994 quote from an aide to President Nixon has surfaced claiming that the war on drugs had everything to do with race and politics. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. Now, 4 decades later, the way we tell the story is starting to shift.
Even more surprising may be the face of the new addicts.
Heroin and opioid use is skyrocketing, killing off mostly young white Americans. And with that, there's a push to see drug abuse for the disease that it really is.
I went to a small private school and I used to be an all-star athlete.
Government officials are admitting that we have too many people in prison for nonviolent drug offenses.
It's not normal.
And many leaders are declaring the so-called war on drugs, which has cost more than $1 trillion, a major failure. So now that we know better, start supporting policies that help people cope with the root of addiction and a cycle of selling that's the real trap.
So we get this, ooh. Oh, that's not good. Here's my card upstairs. We get this history of the inception of the war on drugs, right? So it's a blatant attack on people of color and on hippies and so forth, right? And so now in the 80s what happens is that Reagan comes along and he actually takes it into full stream. And so I'm not going to play this whole thing, but there's a clip. Let me just...
Crack has become America's drug of choice.
How can I fast forward this?
It is an uncontrolled fire.
Where is it? Give me...
Been more than 25 years since crack hit the streets of America.
I'm trying to fast forward it, but I can't seem to see it, so I'm going to go buy it if I can't get it streaming. Where is it? Oh, excuse me. It should be right here, but it's not going to give me the stream. All right, so I'll just give you the backdrop then. So the backdrop is this. The historical backdrop is that, so the Republicans were actually trying to get tough on drugs because crack comes out, and Len Bias, who's a basketball player, he signs to the Celtics. Before he even gets to his first game and so forth, he ODs, right? And so from there, what actually happens is that it happens like right outside of D.C. So the media hypes crack up and so forth. Politicians get together. They said, we got to do something about this, get tougher on drugs. And so they came to the table and said that if you're selling crack, you should get 25 to 1 to cocaine, right? 25 times more the punishment. They went back and forth. They said 25, no, 50, no, 75. 100 to 1 is where they ended up at. So when you've got 5 grams of crack cocaine, it was equivalent to 500 grams of pure cocaine, right? And so thus our mandatory minimum sentencing happened. And we had an influx of mass incarceration, right? Now, Tupac is coming on the heels of this now because he's born in '76, the '90s, and he's a teenager, so he's coming up in this crack era, in this crack generation. And that documentary is actually VH1 Planet Rock, History of Hip Hop and the Crack Generation. And why am I not, oh, you know what, my battery died. Okay, I'm gonna give you a prompt while I get my strip cord. The prompt is this, okay? In your groups, like 3 minutes, okay? Discuss the impact, right, of mass incarceration on American culture, right? Are folks familiar with the term mass incarceration? Okay, good, right? All right, so I'll run upstairs, get my cord. 3 minutes, the impact of mass incarceration on American culture, and then I have some stats that will, if you don't know already, will blow your mind. Absolutely. And so, again, the question becomes, who are they incarcerating, right? So this war on drugs, we have this mandatory minimum sentencing, right, for crack dealers, right? And so primarily crack dealers were people of color, were black people, black men and so forth, right? Cocaine was the rich white person's drug, and crack was the cheap, black drug and so forth. And so as a result, the family structure is destroyed, right? Mothers and fathers. So there was this crack generation that documentary VH1 talks about. Here's what happens. 700% increase in the prison system, right? Over 60% nonviolent. We make up about 5% of the world's population and 20% of the prison population. And so here are some of the stats. And we have more people locked up. The U.S. houses more inmates than the top 35 European countries combined. Okay? And so, hence, with Tupac, right? Okay, that was cool. I didn't even know I had that there, right? A couple more stats for you. But so with Tupac, right? So his mother becomes addicted to crack. And this becomes very turbulent for him because his mother is this pillar, this matriarch in the community and so forth. She's part of the Black Panthers, right? So she was his rock. He didn't know who his father was. She told him, I don't know who your father is. He didn't know until later when he was shot the first time he found out who his father was, right? And so when he finds out that she's doing crack, he moves from Baltimore, right? They go to LA, and he starts to work with a group called the Digital Underground, right? He's a dancer at first, right? For the Humpty Hump song, do the Humpty Hump, right? Tupac is a dancer in the background for that song, right? He gets a couple of bars on a song called Same Song, which was on the soundtrack of a movie with Dan Aykroyd and some of Chevy Chase, I think, some spoof film. And there's a track called The Same Song with Digital Underground. And Tupac gets about 8 bars on that. And he blows up from there, right? And from there, he gets his movie deal. However, while he's on tour, his mother's back smoking. She's smoking crack. He's getting calls. Homies are telling him, your mom's, blah, 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 da, da. And so they become very distant, right? And if you listen to Tupac when he rhymes and so forth, that pain, you can really feel that pain. And so ultimately what happens with his mother is this. Jasmine Guy wrote a memoir with Afeni Shakur called The Evolution of a Revolutionary, right? And so she starts dating this guy in prison in LA. And she says she'd never do stuff like that, right? She ends up getting pregnant by this guy. Then she finds out the guy has someone else coming to see him, and that woman's pregnant too. So now Afeni does not want the baby, right? She's several weeks along and so forth. She can't find anybody to do the abortion, right? She's a little too far along. She knows that she calls this her one-time story she told Jasmine Guy. I'm gonna say it one time, I'm not gonna say it again. She knows that from smoking crack, you can have an abortion, or a miscarriage, excuse me. So she starts smoking crack to intentionally have a miscarriage. These are her own words, right? Doesn't work. She finally found somebody to perform the abortion, right? But, it's late trimester. And so the procedure that they had to do was they had to poke a needle through her stomach that poked the baby's heart to kill the baby, and then she delivered the child. And so you get this scope into Tupac's life and so forth. When he's first coming out with his social protest rhymes. We're not even got to the hedonistic rhymes he was doing later on in his career and so forth, but here are some of the things that he's actually dealing with, right? And the premise of all, he's got his friends going to prison, he's got friends dying and so forth, mother on crack, and then he says this.
Yes, my raps are filled with rage.
One of these days, we gotta bust back for the home, man.
You have to be logical.
Speak louder.
If I know in this hotel room they have food every day, and I'm knocking on the door every day to eat, and they open the door, let me see the party, let me see like them throwing salami all over the, just like throwing food around. But they're telling me there's no food. You know what I'm saying? Every day, I'm standing outside trying to sing my way in. You know what I'm saying? We are hungry, please let us in. We are hungry, please let us in. After about a week, that song is gonna change to we hungry, we need some food. After 2-3 weeks, it's like, give me the food, breaking out the door. And after a year, you just like, I'm saying? I'm picking the lock, coming through the door, blasting, you know what I'm saying? It's like you hungry, you reach your level, you don't want any more. We asked 10 years ago. We was asking with the Panthers. We was asking with them, the civil rights movement. We was asking, now those people that were asking, they're all dead and in jail. So now what do you think we're gonna do? Ask?
I put my gun away and grab my AK. It's getting hectic. I can't call it. House full of alcoholics. Now a niggas under pressure.
There's a bad part because the kids see that and they mimic it. That's the part I haven't figured out yet. But the positive side is the kids who live in a household where the mother is a crackhead or whatever, and he is the rap. It's like, oh, that's an everyday thing for them. So I don't have to feel ashamed. It cuts both ways. To me, it's like, when I say I lived a thug life, baby, I'm hopeless. One person might hear that and just like the way it sounds, you know what I'm saying? But I'm doing it for the kid that really lives a thug life and feels like it's hopeless. So when I say hopeless, when I say it like that, it's like I reach him. You understand? And even if when I reach him, it makes it look glorious to the guy that doesn't live that life. I can't help it. It's a fad, He'll drop the thug life soon enough. But for the person that I was trying to reach, he'll pick it up, and I'll be able to talk to him again.
So you get this introspective premise into Tupac, right? And this is one of his poems and so forth. You can read it while I speak and so forth. So you see where he's getting his thug life philosophy from, his social protest lyrical content and so forth. becoming a megaphone for inner city youth and so forth, right? In particular, people of color, right? And so, we're at this racial amity conference and so forth, right? And so, one of the goals is to, or the major goal, right, is to achieve racial amity and so forth, right? But before we can actually do that, right, we have to take a look introspectively into, well, what are these young people of color, these young black men, what are they experiencing? What are they going through? Where they have, as Tupac said in his code before and so forth, you have a inner conflict amongst themselves, right? Inner conflict, and you have a intra-racial conflict and so forth. You have a governmental structure systematically imposed, right, to oppress, subjugate. We saw Nixon's quote from his advisor. Hoover from the FBI, COINTEL program, counterintelligence program, spying on pretty much anyone who was politically combatant to the mainstream system and so forth, right? And so his mother is part of that. When Tupac was a kid, his stepfather, Mutulu Shakur, who's serving life in California, he was on the run. And so when Tupac would be walking back from school, he would get stopped by FBI agents. Hey, where's your father? Where's your stepfather? 12 years old and so forth. And you're getting questioned by an FBI agent. And then you know who they are after a while and so forth. So what type of effect does that have on a young child's psyche, right? And so, couple of questions, right? So has hip-hop caused or reflected the violence we should detest, right? And then who should be held accountable for social responsibility in hip-hop culture, right? So in a nutshell, has hip-hop caused or does it reflect the violence that we detest? Yay, nay, no? I see a couple, yes, shake us. Yeah?
I mean, hip-hop reflects the violence in society.
Okay.
And I think it's the music is something that can save the kids, actually. Music and all other things that are connected to the culture, to black culture.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the kids are not black, they can relate. And this can be a savior. But what we see in school, we don't see space for this. I'm talking from the point of view of a teacher.
Yeah.
We don't see space. And if they want to do it, they are restricted, they cannot do it. So it becomes more and more marginalized.
Yeah.
Of course, there's the language. The language sometimes is very tough for us. I don't like to listen to something, but it's their expression. And I think it will be forever until things change, and things are not really changing. I was telling people in my group, I went to see that movie Moonlight, and I think all educators should go and see it. It changed the way I look at the students. I look at them and I say, well, I don't know these kids. I don't know where they're coming from. Their lives are can be so hard, and they are sitting there, but they have a huge history.
To go through it, right?
And we cannot ignore that. So for me, the first step is to acknowledge.
Excellent. And you said the kids aren't getting this, right? And so the larger the question becomes why, right? So what happens with the social protest era of hip-hop, right? Because NWA comes along and commodification of hip-hop, boom, right? Market economy. Well, powers that be said, whoa, wait a minute. These kids are actually listening to these lyrics. They're becoming empowered listening to Public Enemy. They're becoming empowered listening to Tupac and so forth, right? And so we gotta do something about that, right? So social protest era is out, where it's evoking conscious critical thought and conscious critical conversations, and party era is introduced. Bad boy era, P. Diddy, dancing, party, shiny suits, da-da-da-da-da. And then we move into a more materialistic, hedonistic spotlight for commercial rap, right? The social protest still exists to this day, lyrics, but the spotlight now becomes, with the Sony and Viacom and so forth. Well, and then now if you look today, where trap music and so forth, where you really can't really understand the lyrics and there's not much lyrical content there. And then you wonder why you hear the same songs over and over on every single station. Well, in 1996, Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of 96. It legalized monopolies. And so what happened was the radio stations came through, the independent ones, they got bought up. So the major companies are Viacom, Time Warner, which is what now, almost AT&T, right? And Sony Universal. I think they keep conglomerating now. They keep buying each other, so I can't keep up with them. And so they own 98% of the airwaves. So that's why you hear the same songs, because they put out a playlist, and it goes throughout the entire country, no matter where you are at. And so then what happens to the message? If I own 98% and I want a particular message I want to put out there and so forth, I got the means to do so. I got the means to squander, right, this accountability in hip hop. I got the means to not even evoke social responsibility and so forth, right? Hip hop reflects the violence that we saw through media. We saw through films like Scarface and so forth, right? And that was a major film that influenced hip-hop culture. I'm kind of pressed for time as we've got a late start and kind of difficulties, so we got like 10 minutes left. So there are three important differences between the criticism of hip-hop and rappers and those leveled at other music, films, shows, and videos, right? So hip-hop is scrutinized in particularly, right? So perception. The perception of violence is heightened when it appears in rap music form rather than in other popular genres of music featuring violent imagery, right? And a critical question or rhetorical is why is rap scrutinized? And then if we just play a little So it's hard to turn Pac off. And so you start to hear the difference in his rhymes now, from the social political content from 91 to more hedonistic. He embraces the thug life philosophy. Many critics argue he got lost in the character of Bishop from Juice and so forth. And so we have a hard time figuring out who Tupac is with this dichotomous lifestyle. And then art and social responsibility, right? So a critical question, rhetorical question. Is it fair to expect Tupac to succeed where Archbishop Tutu failed? The complex relationship between art and social responsibility is evident, but we must be careful not to place unrealistic or even unjust demands on the backs of artists, right? And then so a larger question is what happens when a counterculture goes pop, right? Hip-hop's a counterculture, now it's a pop culture, right? And so this is from Michael Eric Dyson. What are your thoughts on that? But we must be careful not to place unrealistic or even unjust demands on the backs of artists. Do we do that? Do we place these unrealistic demands on their backs? Why? How?
But I don't think you should even place these unrealistic demands on the religious person either.
Very true. Very true. Right? Very true. But we do. We do this in society, right? We actually, that's a good thought because we attribute messiah complexes to people in society, leaders in society. We definitely attribute a messiah complex to Archbishop Tutu, who recently passed away, right? Definitely assigned a messiah complex to Tupac, and we shouldn't do that. We've done it to Barack Obama. We see these people in our lives, society, and they exhibit strong leadership qualities, and we say, lead us to the promised land. Tupac had people, grown men in jail, like he said, writing him letters saying, we want you to lead our movement. He's got people across Black America looking for him to lead social movements. Coming off of post-civil rights era, where through the 50s to the 70s, a slew of assassinations killed many of our leaders, Black leaders in the communities, right? Others were exiled, and others were imprisoned. His aunt, Assata Shakur, right? Exiled to Cuba, not exiled, but escaped to Cuba back in the early, mid-70s and so forth, late 70s. She was facing prison time for killing a Jersey trooper, but she didn't actually do it. And scientific evidence proves she didn't do it, but they needed somebody to crucify. She was liberated by whites and blacks. When we talk about racial amity, they broke her out of prison, and she's been exiled in Cuba ever since, right? And so we should not attribute these messiah complexes and so forth, right? But then somehow, some way, through hip hop culture and through the life of Tupac Shakur, right, he gets deemed as a messiah. How much time I got left? Like 3 minutes. A messiah, you know, and a villain, and a demon and so forth, right? Second one is many critics of hip hop tend to interpret lyrics literally and as a direct reflection of the artist who performs them. Critics often characterize rappers as speaking entirely autobiographical, and this is what's known as the black authenticity, right? As to, or keeping it real, right? And Tupac mentioned that a lot in his lyrics, keeping it real. And he says here, I reveal myself in every one of my records. I tell my own personal problems, and people can relate to what I believe. But he also talks about how he uses allegories and fiction and fables and so forth. He did a lot of studying of literature and culture and so forth, right? And the third central difference between the criticism of hip-hop and the criticism leveled at other art forms of popular culture has to do with the way the artists themselves are perceived in relation to their audiences and society. Here's what we get to. Other forms of media, video games and movies, quote, influence otherwise nonviolent teenagers, encouraging them to act violently. From this perspective, our youth must be protected from these outside negative aggressive influences. In the case of rap, the assumption is that the artists represent an existing and already threatening violent black culture that must be prevented from affecting society at large. Here, we have the racial disparities and so forth. Here is where Stallone and Schwarzenegger can kill as many people as they want on the TV screen and so forth, and it's fun, it's entertainment and so forth. However, when these young black males take it to the level of using imagery through audio and so forth, well, that becomes a problem, right? Black culture becomes a problem. Well, it's the modern problem of black culture, because we can historically go back, and there's always seemed to be some injustification of, you know, criminalizing black men and black culture. I have like 2 minutes left, and I just want to wrap. Critical question, does America need to be protected from a violent black culture, right? Youth culture. We talk about accountability, social ability in hip hop. How can hip hop help achieve racial amity? I think I'll end with this one. I got one more slide left, but how can hip hop help achieve racial amity, right? And it's a critical question, so I wanted to take it with you. I wish we had more time. We had a late start going, things got out of whack. But as we're here at this conference and so forth, right? And it can be from hip hop from a modern perspective, from a historical perspective, or an amalgamation of the two, right? But if it is the cultural language, that's the last line I'll get to here. We'll go through that. Given its universal popularity and its troubling effects, hip-hop is a vital cultural language that we all had better learn. To ignore its genius, romanticize its deficits, or to bash it with undiscerning generalities is to risk the opportunity to engage our children about perhaps the most important cultural force in their lives. Force, that's the typo, force in their lives. They're listening to it. They love it, right? Hip-hop has bridged generational gaps. One of the problems with my era and the era before me is that there was no communication post-civil rights, you know? And then we came up in this era of the 80s and so forth, and introduced to street culture and crack and so forth. When you take all the leaders out and you flood it with guns and drugs and so forth, you have this huge vacuum, right? So it's a cultural language. So we better pay attention to it, right? Love it or hate it. This is a critical conversation about hip hop. It's not about if you love it or hate it, but we better pay attention to it because it has the ears of our youth, right? And if we're going to move forward, especially, I won't say especially, but if we're going to move forward and we're going to actually address these racial disparities in search of racial amity and so forth, we can't do it without them. And if we don't listen to them, well, we already know what happens and so forth, right? And so take some time and talk to the youth, right? Examine the lyrics. If they listen to trap music and so forth, examine the lyrics. I can give you these information right here too if you want. Examine their lyrics. Have conversations with them. You know, critical. What are these lyrics saying? What are their intent? And what do they mean to do? So I leave you with this, right? Tupac always felt that he had a responsibility to take care of the people around him. He had a big heart like that, right? I didn't choose the thug life chose me. So from this point on, right, as you have conversations about hip hop culture and so forth, or rap music, bridge the gap, the cultural language, and we can achieve that racial amity. Thank you, folks.
With the N-word, this is a big deal for me.
Well, it is, and we're definitely out of time. I think we start talking about that.
I would like to discuss it because if we had
Come back tomorrow when I'm doing 11 o'clock, and we'll incorporate it if you like. But I got the cue to cut it because we got to get rolling and so forth. So I thank you folks for coming. You could have been anywhere. We can have the conversation later on in the hallways. You see me, you want to talk, we can talk about it and so forth.